right, we are here with Dr. Ted Carlin, professor here at Shippensburg University of Electronic Media. How are you doing today, Dr. Carlin?
I'm good. Hanging in there, trying to stay alive.
Aren't we all? Brady, how are you?
I'm good. It's kind of the same.
That's good. And I'm doing absolutely fantastic. Now, I wanted to do this with you today, Dr. Carlin, because I've had you multiple times as a professor, and you are a knowledgeable person. At least that's how I feel.
And I'm old.
Well, that's even better for this sort of topic.
That's right. There you go.
And where we're going with this, and how technology has certainly shaped our view of the world, and certainly education, especially today, especially with how COVID has changed our lives. And I wanted to start off with that. And how do you think COVID has changed the way we look at education and the way students certainly learn from, especially from when you certainly started teaching or when you were a student yourself?
Yeah. So, when I was in college in the 80s, mid 80s, like 81 to 85, there were no computers in any of our classrooms. There might have been one room on campus where they had these new computer things called Macintosh, and they were these little, the 12, 14-inch Macintosh SE. And then when I got here to Ship in the mid 90s, we actually had a room full of those. And then, so it was all typewriters. So all the way in, when I did my master's thesis in the late 80s, it was done on a typewriter. I didn't type it. I wrote it and had paid somebody $10 a page to type but she did all the editing and revisions. And I remember going to Ames. Do you remember Ames as a store? It was like a Target.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
To buy an electronic typewriter with an automatic erase button. Otherwise, you'd have to exit out, or get one of these pencils to erase. So it's fundamentally different in terms of being a student today versus then. Everything is better. Yes. I mean, I would, everything from, let's say, just like that, typing on a typewriter, to doing radio production. Like I learned to do radio using reel-to-reel tapes, the big, 8-inch reels going, just like you'd see in a film projector, and then marking it with a grease pencil right past the record head, and then pulling that off, putting it down into the razor blade thing and pressing the razor blade so it would cut it, and then find the other end and then cut it, and then take some tape, specially made tape, and put it in, put it together. That's called a splice. So, anything that we did was manual. And I guess that would be my biggest thing, is that, back then everything was manual. You had to do everything yourself. Go to the library, right? There was no computer in the library. You had to go to a card catalog and fish through there to find things. The greatest thing ever was, instead of, you only had access to the newspapers that were there that they kept. But once they got this thing called microfilm or microfiche, where they would take pictures of papers and put it on these film strips, and you go into this little machine, pop your thing on the reels, one on each end, just like the audio recorder, and you'd reel it through, and then it would take a picture of the picture, and then, it would print it. Heck, we didn't even have photocopiers readily available. You had to pay for. Everything was manual. Like if I wanted to do my resume, right? I'd have to go and type it, take it to a printer and have it printed. So any little change, if you made a typo and you made 50 copies, you got to go back there and give them and start all over. So all manual. That's the best description of school and everything. What we're doing now with the internet and online it's fascinating. It's not my preferred way to teach, but you couldn't interview me either without this technology, right? I mean, we could do it on the phone.
Right.
So there are advantages in pandemics, or like I've been teaching online for 20 years in the summer, right? 1 or 2 classes. And that's not bad. You got a student in there, that's their only thing. They're probably working a job or vacation or whatever. And that you can focus on 1 or 2, but trying to do this stuff that we do now with 4 or 5 classes at a time, I truly sympathize for every student that I have, because it's nuts. It's just,
Right.
it's chaotic and it's not what you're used to. So we've gone to automatic, but automatic's not always better.
Right. And you said that you had to take something to a person that was specifically trained in like a typewriter. So those were certain skills people would actually go out and try and get and be proficient in typewriting.
Yeah. Like I took a typing class, 1 class in high school, right? And it was taught by the business part of the high school, and my tennis coach was the teacher, and it was great. I learned to type, but I didn't go further to try to get so many words per minute. So
Right.
yeah, there were people that were skilled, really skilled professional typists that were students. And the person that I had do mine was a graduate student as well. And they were making money instead of working at McDonald's like I did. They were typing. Yeah, I worked at McDonald's for 5 years. So.
Wow.
Oh.
Surprised you lasted that long.
Hey, I worked mornings. I did breakfast, and so it was great. And in Maryland, it was fun.
Oh, gotcha. You were also talking about you said you teach online for 20 years, even back in 2000. How has that changed?
That's when it started. So
Right.
they had this thing.
Differently.
They had this thing in the state system that they were trying to create. It was called the virtual university. So at each of the state system schools, they were going to experiment with some online classes. And I was one of the 5 teachers at SHIP. I did Intro to Mass Comm, and there were some other ones that volunteered to do this. And then it started and grew. So that's when it started back in 2000. And then I've been teaching that class just about every summer since then. So, and I've taught other ones, but that was the one that got it started. And there were, class from criminal justice, class from English, a class from bio, and then one from business. I'm not sure what it was, but yep, they've been slowly working on this since the internet really, those first few years in the late 90s when it really got started, and people started to use it. And then educational institutions, because we got money, the way that it works, government and education get money to do research, right? And that included, drugs and things like that. But it also includes technology and computers and the internet. When I first used email in 1986, it was called Pine. And it was an experimental email system that was set up at different universities. And Bowling Green was one of the consortium of schools. And so my advisor was on the research team, and I was in one of his classes. So we used email. Everybody else was like, what the hell is that? And nobody knew. I mean, it was only the government and the researchers that were trying to connect this internet thing together. All of these, servers at all of these places, all of these universities are government installations, and connect this web that we have now that's then gone on to commercial companies and all kinds of things. So, and it allows hackers and dark webs and all kinds of webs that are out there. But it all started with government and education doing research and trying, why? The number one reason why we have the internet, it was for secrecy of communication. The government wanted to be able to send information and not get it intercepted on phones and satellites and stuff like that. So it was a secret network that was developed by DARPA, the Defense Research, and they, as they always do, they use universities and or, if it's a plane, they use McDonnell Douglas or those big companies.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So it's been fascinating to be along for that ride. And now where we're at today it's fascinating to me just to see, 30 people on a Zoom. It's not effective, but at least you're all there together,
right,
staring at each other or
and
something.
Like what you said with email, do you remember the same thing with like when search engines started becoming popular, like Google,
Well,
or something before search engines too? I mean, you were teaching at the time. I mean, early 2000s, that would have been it.
Were either one of you in my sports journalism class yet?
Yeah, I was in there.
So you remember the one when we watched the one about the not Let Them Wear Towels, the other one, the one where there's Anna Kournikova is in there,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and
Yeah.
female athletes, right? Remember? And she was the most downloaded thing on the internet.
Hmm.
I remember that. I was one of those people that were trying to download pictures of her and Farrah Fawcett and all that. But at that time in the late 90s, it all started as text.
Mm.
And so getting these pictures, it would take 10 minutes for a picture to download.
Wow.
And you'd watch it line by line, because we're talking dial up. And so you're talking about very slow connections between my computer and some server over these phone lines that were not broadband, that were not digital or fiber. So, yeah, and even thinking about doing a movie, it's like the difference between Pong as a game and my son playing FIFA, the new FIFA.
Right.
Like what? It's amazing to watch. What's that one? Racquetball or whatever?
Rocket League.
Rocket League. That's cool. That would have been great. I'm playing Pong. I was one of those kids playing Pong in Space Invaders. I am it. I am your living museum of technology change. Yes, that's me.
So I have a question here. If this pandemic would have happened when you were like in college in the 80s, how do you think would schools have been able to like handle that? How would that have worked?
Yes, but not obviously with technology. So if you go back, there was a great story that I read that was on Twitter, and it was New York Times, and it had to do with the pandemic, the flu pandemic in 1918.
Right.
And they showed all of these schools, especially elementary schools, that were meeting with masks on, that were meeting outside. So that's what we would have done, I think. I think we would have, and we should have done that from the beginning here. If back in March, April, we all would have been wearing masks, right? We've learned a lot about this whole thing and how everything, but there are ways to do it, especially if you're outside. Yeah, it would be difficult when it was cold. So I'm not sure what would, you would have to change the school year maybe or do something, but I think we could have done it. It would have been different. And trying to get into closed spaces like a TV studio,
right.
We'd have to do it like we do now with fewer people, but we could have done it. Would have been difficult, but I think back then we were much more, I'm not going to say people aren't as resourceful now. I'm just saying we were more used to inconvenience as we go, we didn't have it. Like I grew up with no air conditioning, no television, right? Until my mom got remarried and I was 9, 10 years old, we got TV. I didn't have TV. My friends did, but we were too poor to have a television. So it was just one of those things. So depending on, I had a fan in my room and no air conditioning, while the kid across the street has this, I always wanted to sleep over, right? Because why wouldn't you? So, and they had a microwave. I remember when microwaves came in. So yeah, I think we find ways and we invent things in our country. It's the great thing about the ingenuity of people. I mean, there's not just Zoom now, there's all kinds of, teleconferencing, video conferencing platforms and add-ons and editing software, right? There's so much stuff, but I think we would have been able to do it. Yeah, Brady, back then. It would have been difficult, but I think it's not like we never had a pandemic before, and all the things that we did back then, wearing masks and staying separated would still work. Whether or not there was a president or Congress and leaders that would have implemented it, that would have been the big difference, right? It's kind of been a failure with communication in this one. I'm not blaming either party. I'm just blaming general communication and adherence to science. Science rules. I'm sorry. I love Bill Nye the Science Guy. He's my hero. So.
No, I agree, and I read some on that as well, and I saw the pictures too on the 1918 thing, and how I just saw certain cities were doing that. I knew New York also was doing it as well with open, staying in school and whatnot. And you could see, it's very similar to how it is, we're trying to do the whole social distancing thing, because they had signs about that as well. Because I've seen pictures on that too, so it was just. Yep. It was interesting to see, and yeah, I agree. I think it could have worked, but it just would have been a challenge. I think with this, at least, it's a lot easier to do things rather than have to still manage to go in person, fully having.
Like in the spring, we would have done that in the spring. We would have just, halted or something. I mean, you couldn't just switch over to D2L.
I
right?
mean, it certainly happened so fast, and that we couldn't have. Um, I don't think we wouldn't have had enough time to adapt so quickly. So I guess
No.
doing it now, the way that we did it back then in the spring, I guess it was the right decision. What we're doing now is just how we've adapted since,
Yep.
is how I feel. Uh, so, Dr. Collin, where do you see technology taking education? What are your visions for the future? You've seen so much. Where do you
My
see it going
visions.
from here? Yes.
Um, well, I think for me, the number one factor that's influencing how we do education is money. So there's got to be some way that we deal with um, expenses better at a university. And I am the major expense. So, when you're talking about a radio station, what's their rate? What's their major expense? No, it's not the music. They get that for free, right? It's the DJs that are the talent. And so what many of stations have done since deregulation in the 90s is fire most of their staff. Why? Because we can use computers to replace people, and you can pay somebody to voice track. It's what we do at WSYC. So when there's no DJ on, we put music and announcers and everything and record them. So you can pay one person to do the work of 8 people, just about. So in education, we've got to figure out what's the best use of money. Is it to pay professors and have people in classes? Is that the best way to do it? Should we have a hybrid approach? Should we have every classroom have an OWL camera or system so that you can be either there and pay less and pay more to get the experience on campus because you're getting more? You know what I'm saying? I think that sounds good. I like that idea. I mean, paying more for what you get, more of I think it needs to be more driven towards service of what the customer wants, right? I think if you want to pay for a full experience, parties, Greek life, and all that, you should pay for that. You want to be here and socialize, then you get that. But we're not going to go back to not having any online stuff. It's just too cost effective. And too many colleges keep raising tuition every year. Why? Because it's more expensive to pay us every year. My salary goes up, and not a whole lot. It only went up 1% this year, but then my benefits go up, right? And so it gets more expensive. And so how do you fix that? Charge you more, or, get more people to come, or whatever it is. So I think there's got to be a trade-off, and we have to make education more of a service industry, meaning like more a la carte. You know what I mean? Like, you want to do this, you pay for this. It's not a one size all. Come as a freshman to SHIP or Harvard and you pay 20,000 or 50,000. It should be various levels for the experience that you want. And I think that's the biggest thing. Technology is only going to get better. And the type of
Right.
tools that we have. When I started, there was no Zoom. There was no all these cool things there wasn't even PowerPoint. So a lot of stuff is going to happen. Technology is going to get better and make the experience better. 5G is going to make it faster, right? So there's a ton of stuff that's going to happen. We've just got to figure out a better pricing model so that we're not charging you for something. Well, I can go over here and get it. We've got to figure out ways to make it, fit the customer's needs.
Well, very well said. With saying that technology is just going to get better, do you think that this is possibly the end of the snow day?
Yes. In fact, I never have snow days. I've been doing it that way with D2L forever.
Right.
When you have kids or asthma, stuff happens. So my son is in high school. He's a junior. And they pretty much said, your days of this snow day stuff are done. They gave him all Chromebooks. And so, that's how he's doing it now. But there's no excuse now. They went all in on technology. So now nobody has an excuse. So now, obviously, what the teacher does with that snow day, or what the teacher does, depends on the course and what you're doing. I can give you an assignment. or just go on D2L and say read chapter 4 or something, or we could meet. I don't know how that's going to work out, but it's just like with us having D2L for the past 15 years, it just makes it, if I'm sick, I can still have class or give you an option. I don't feel like we're just going to bail on everything. So.
Right. No, that's a very true statement. I believe that entirely, especially if the school has the funding for it and to, supply students with Chromebooks or have certain things to where they can get stuff out.
It's just like having sports teams. Like I've got to pay $100 a year for my son to play soccer.
Right.
Why? Well, that helps to pay for buses or uniforms or whatever. And, there you go. So the whole idea is, really, it's going to come down to money in any of this. And we've got to make sure that we're just like any other industry. Shopping's not the same, right? Why? More car? I mean, you can buy a car online. Everything's different. So why won't education? We just can't stay in the ivory tower of education and not adapt to what students want or experience in high school, and then get here and then have to sit in the class for 50 minutes a day, every day or whatever, multiple times a day, and just be bored to tears. That's not going to work. So we got to find ways to make it better, make it more engaging, and fit what the student wants, or else students are going to go where they can get that. And I think institutions have to understand it's not the same old ball game.
100%. Dr. Carlin, I want to thank you for your time today. It's been fantastic. You've certainly enlightened me on a lot of topics. I think, Brady, can you say the same?
Yeah, it's definitely been enlightening to hear like how much technology has changed. So
yeah, especially from your standpoint, it's been certainly you have plenty of stories, and it's lovely to hear.
Yeah, too many. Yeah, I haven't had to give out too many stories. Although when I do my Zoom